The sun beat down on the parched earth of our ranch, a relentless heat that had been a constant companion for as long as I could remember. Our home, a sprawling two-story farmhouse built by my great-great-grandfather, stood like a defiant old soldier amidst the vast, golden fields. It had seen droughts, blizzards, good times and bad, always providing sanctuary. My grandpa, bless his stubborn heart, was 92 and still insisted on checking the fence lines every morning. Today, though, he'd taken a turn. A bad turn. His breathing was shallow, his color off, and the panic in my gut was a cold, unwelcome guest. I'd called 911, and the wail of the ambulance siren, faint at first, grew steadily louder, a sound of hope cutting through the oppressive quiet. I stood on the porch, my eyes scanning the long, winding dirt road that led to our property, willing them to appear. Then I saw it, not the ambulance, not yet, but a bright, almost blindingly white SUV, a luxury vehicle that looked utterly out of place on our dusty rural road, pulled to a sudden halt right at the entrance to our drive. And out stepped Karen. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair seemed impervious to the heat, her designer sunglasses reflecting the harsh sunlight like twin mirrors. She was the self-appointed queen of our newly formed Homeowners Association, a development nobody in our family had wanted, but which had been foisted upon us when a large portion of our generational land was sold off for suburban expansion after my uncle's financial troubles. Our old farmhouse, sitting on its now smaller but still significant acreage, was technically part of this new community, a fact Karen never let us forget. She was a stickler for rules, or rather, her interpretation of them, and she'd been a thorn in our side since the ink on the HOA documents was barely dry. Her previous grievances had ranged from the color of my mailbox to rustic to the natural height of the wild prairie grass that bordered our property, unmanicured and attracting vermin. I'd tried to ignore her, to reason with her, to explain that our home predated her entire development by over a century. It was like talking to a brick wall coated in passive-aggressive glitter. Today, though, was different. I could hear the ambulance siren clearly now, just around the bend, and Karen, with a self-satisfied smirk, was setting up a series of bright orange traffic cones directly across our main entrance. My blood ran cold. "Karen, what in the blazes are you doing?" I yelled, striding towards her, my voice rough, with a fear I tried desperately to suppress. She turned, her smile tightening into something less pleasant. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "I'm merely enforcing the new HOA regulation regarding unauthorized commercial vehicles on private property. Section 4, subsection B. Paragraph 3 clearly states." She gestured grandly towards a laminated sign she'd stuck to one of the cones, which read, in bold, aggressive letters, "HOA-approved vehicles only. Violators will be towed. Commercial vehicles." "Karen, that's an ambulance. My grandpa needs help," I pleaded, my voice cracking. The siren was practically on top of us now, and I could see the flashing lights through the trees. The ambulance, a beacon of hope, was slowing down, confused by the sudden obstacle. Karen, however, remained unmoved. Her eyes, magnified behind the sunglasses, seemed to gleam with a disturbing sense of triumph. "I understand your distress, Mr. Thompson. However, rules are rules. And this ambulance, while perhaps necessary for your family emergency, has not been pre-approved by the HOA board for entry onto the property. You should have submitted a request form at least 48 hours in advance for any non-resident vehicles requiring access. This is private property, after all." She puffed out her chest, seemingly proud of her bureaucratic obstruction. The ambulance, now fully stopped, its lights flashing silently, was a stark reminder of the precious moments slipping away. The paramedics, two young men with worried expressions, were looking at me, then at Karen, then at the cones, clearly bewildered. "We have a medical emergency, ma'am," one of them called out, his voice urgent. "The patient is critical." "And, as I just explained to Mr. Thompson," Karen retorted, her voice rising slightly, "you are on HOA-controlled private property without authorization. You'll need to turn around." A wave of heat, not from the sun but from pure, unadulterated rage, washed over me. My grandpa, inside that house, fighting for breath, and this woman was playing power games with his life. "Karen, if anything happens to my grandpa because of this insanity, I swear to God, you will regret it for the rest of your life," I snarled, my voice low and menacing. But she just sniffed, adjusting her sunglasses. "Threats are also against HOA policy, Mr. Thompson. Perhaps you should review the new bylaws. They are quite comprehensive." The audacity, the sheer unfeeling arrogance of her, was breathtaking. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, my fists clenching at my sides. This wasn't just about my grandpa anymore. This was about everything. She represented the encroachment of senseless rules, the erosion of our freedom, the disregard for human decency. This was war, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I was just getting started. The ambulance stood still, a silent testament to Karen's unyielding grip, and the clock was ticking, not just for my grandpa, but for the entire rotten structure of that HOA. The standoff felt eternal, a tableau frozen under the unforgiving sun. the emergency medical personnel, their faces etched with concern, the gleaming ambulance, an emblem of aid, denied, and Karen, radiating an almost smug satisfaction as she guarded her orange cones like a dragon guarding its ill-gotten hoard. My grandpa's life hung in the balance, and this woman was citing HOA bylaws. It was grotesque. "Move the cones, Karen, now," I repeated, my voice strained, each word a tightrope walk between desperate plea and explosive fury. She simply shook her head, a small triumphant smile playing on her lips. "I'm afraid I cannot, Mr. Thompson. As the head of the Architectural Review Committee and interim vice president of the HOA, I am obligated to uphold the regulations. Perhaps your grandfather can be transported to the gate. We can arrange for a gurney to meet him there, provided you submit the appropriate liability waivers." My jaw dropped. The sheer unfathomable absurdity of it was almost comical, if it weren't for the dire circumstances. Transport my gravely ill, elderly grandfather over a quarter-mile of rough terrain on a gurney because this woman was having a power trip. Are you out of your mind? He's 92. He can barely walk across a room, let alone be wheeled down a dirt road in this heat, I roared, gesturing wildly towards the shimmering heat haze that distorted the distant horizon. The paramedics, bless their professional hearts, were already taking action. One was on his radio, clearly explaining the situation to dispatch, likely requesting police assistance. The other, a younger man, was attempting to reason with Karen, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, this is a life-threatening emergency. We can't wait. Every minute counts. And every minute, sir, is a potential liability for the HOA," Karen countered, her tone sickeningly prim. "We cannot have just anyone driving on our newly paved roads without proper vetting. The wear and tear, the potential for property damage, it's all in the bylaw." She even pointed to the road, a perfectly good, albeit freshly paved, asphalt strip that looked no different than any other road. This wasn't about property damage. This was about control. This was about asserting her perceived authority, even if it meant sacrificing a human life. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated evil cloaked in bureaucratic nonsense. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, a premonition of what was to come if I didn't act. I wasn't just fighting for my grandpa anymore. I was fighting for the soul of our community, for the right to simply exist on our own land without the tyranny of a petty tyrant. Suddenly, the younger paramedic, clearly frustrated beyond measure, walked up to the cones. "Look, ma'am, just going to move these. We have to get to the patient." Karen's eyes widened, and she took a step back, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her chest in a dramatic gesture. "Don't you dare, that's HOA property. I'll have you arrested for trespassing and vandalism," she shrieked, her voice losing its manufactured calm and cracking with genuine outrage. It was a beautiful sound, the cracks in her meticulously crafted facade. But then, as if on cue, a pristine white HOA security vehicle, a golf cart decked with flashing amber lights, zoomed up, kicking up a plume of dust, and behind its wheel was Bob, a retired corrections officer Karen had appointed as the HOA's head of security, a man who clearly relished his new, albeit minor, authority. Bob, a burly man with a permanent scowl, stepped out, adjusting his ill-fitting security uniform. "Problem, Karen," he grunted, eyeing the ambulance and the paramedics with suspicion. Karen pointed a trembling finger at the paramedic. "He's attempting to violate HOA property and obstruct my duties." "Arrest him, Bob," she demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. Bob, without a moment's hesitation, stepped in front of the paramedic, his chest puffed out. You heard the lady step away from the cones. The situation had escalated from a frustrating inconvenience to a full-blown confrontation, with my grandpa's life hanging by a thread. Just then, in the distance, I heard another siren, louder, more authoritative. The local sheriff's department. A faint glimmer of hope sparked within me. Maybe, just maybe, common sense would prevail. But then I remembered Karen's influence. She'd moved mountains, or at least pulled strings, to get this HOA established. Her connections ran deep, and her reach, I was discovering, was terrifyingly far. The approaching police siren was not a guarantee of salvation, but simply the next round in this absurd life-or-death battle. The sun beat down, the air shimmered, and the silence, punctuated only by the distant wail of the police siren and my own ragged breathing, was deafening. This was no longer just about access. It was a desperate race against time, with Karen standing as the immovable, self-righteous obstacle. The sheriff's patrol car pulled up, a swirl of red and blue lights adding to the surreal spectacle. Sheriff Brody, a man whose family had been in these parts almost as long as mine, stepped out, his weathered face creased with a familiar blend of exhaustion and duty. He took in the scene, the ambulance lights still flashing, the agitated paramedics carrying her face a mask of self-importance, and me, trying to maintain some semblance of calm amidst the storm of panic and rage. "All right, what in tarnation is going on here?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. Before I could speak, Karen launched into a dramatic recital of grievances, pointing wildly at the ambulance, the cones, and finally, at me. "Sheriff, thank goodness you're here. Mr. Thompson and these medical professionals are attempting to trespass on HOA property, violate community bylaws, and obstruct my duties as a board member. They refuse to acknowledge our new regulations regarding vehicle access. She held up a thick binder, its cover emblazoned with the HOA logo, as if it were a sacred text. Sheriff Brody listened patiently, his gaze occasionally flickering to me, a silent question in his eyes. When Karen finally paused for breath, he turned to me. "Thompson, what's your side?" I explained, my voice tight with urgency, about my grandpa, about his critical condition, and about Karen es inconcesionable refusal to allow the ambulance access. I emphasized the 150-year history of our home. The fact that this land had been family property long before any HOA existed. The paramedics, seizing the opportunity, quickly chimed in, detailing the medical urgency and their inability to reach the patient. Sheriff Brody rubbed his chin, his eyes narrowed as he considered the situation. He knew our family, he knew our history, and he knew Karen. His relationship with the HOA, a new and often contentious entity in our quiet county, was, shall we say, strained. He walked over to the cones, bending down to examine the HOA-approved vehicles only sign. Then slowly, deliberately, he looked at Karen. "Ma'am," he began, his voice surprisingly gentle, yet with an underlying steel. "I understand you have your bylaws, but this is a medical emergency. State law dictates that emergency services have right of way, especially in a life-or-death situation. Regardless of private property, public safety takes precedence." Karen, however, was not easily swayed. She puffed herself up, ready for another round of legalistic jargon. "But Sheriff, this is our property. We have legal counsel who assured us that our bylaws supersede." "Karen," Sheriff Brody interrupted, his voice now sharper. "With all due respect, your legal counsel sounds like they're selling you a bill of goods. And frankly, this is ridiculous. A man's life is on the line." He then turned to the paramedics. "Go on, boys, move those cones. Get to the patient, I'll handle this." A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. The paramedics didn't hesitate. They swiftly moved the cones, one of them giving Karen a pointed, unsmiling look as he did so. The ambulance, finally free, lurched forward, its tires kicking up dust as it sped towards the house. As it disappeared down the drive, I felt a tremor of hope. Though the fear for my grandpa remained a cold ache in my chest, Karen, however, was incandescent with rage. "You can't do that, Sheriff. This is an abuse of power. I'm going to report you to the county commission. I'll have your badge," she shrieked, her face a blotchy red. She was practically vibrating with indignation, a truly laughable sight if the circumstances weren't so dire. Her arms flailed, resembling a malfunctioning windmill. Sheriff Brody simply sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Karen, you're welcome to report me to anyone you like, but right now you're obstructing justice and potentially interfering with a medical emergency, which is a felony. I'd advise you to calm down before I have to cite you for disorderly conduct." He then turned to Bob, who had been standing awkwardly to the side, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Bob, you go on home. Your services aren't needed here." Bob, clearly recognizing which way the wind was blowing, mumbled something incoherent and scurried back to his golf cart, leaving Karen fuming alone. "Furthermore," Karen, Sheriff Brody continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I recall something about this property, something from way back. Didn't your HOA incorporate around an old survey? One that might not quite apply to the Thompson homestead?" He looked at me, a glint in his eye. "Thompson, didn't your great-grandpappy have some kind of special deed, something that predated all this modern nonsense?" A sudden, electrifying thought hit me. The old deed, buried deep in a dusty safe, almost forgotten, was an original land grant signed by a territorial governor, granting our family perpetual and unrestricted access to the property, even across any future rights of way or subdivisions. It was a document my grandpa often spoke of with reverence, a symbol of our family's unwavering claim to the land. I'd always dismissed it as a quaint historical artifact, but now it felt like a weapon. "The original land grant, Sheriff," I exclaimed, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me. "It specifies certain immunities, I believe, rights that predate any modern zoning or association regulations." Sheriff Brody nodded slowly, a knowing look on his face. "That's what I thought. Karen, I suggest you have your lawyer take a very close look at that document, because if that deed says what I think it says, then your HOA has absolutely no jurisdiction over Mr. Thompson's property, including his driveway. And if that's the case, then everything you've done here today, including setting up these cones and attempting to block an ambulance, is not just ridiculous, but potentially illegal interference with a protected property right." Karen's triumphant expression vanished, replaced by a pale, shocked disbelief. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking suddenly fragile and exposed. The sheer devastating implications of the sheriff's words hung in the air, a silent but undeniable threat. The battle lines weren't just drawn, they were being redrawn, and Karen's carefully constructed empire was beginning to crumble. The ambulance, blessedly unimpeded, had disappeared down our long driveway. Its siren now a distant, fading wail, a sound I hoped signaled aid, not goodbye. Sheriff Brody, meanwhile, stood patiently, watching Karen's face contort through a gamut of emotions: disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, a flicker of something I hadn't seen before: fear. A pre-existing deed. That's impossible, she stammered, her voice thin and reedy, a far cry from her usual booming authority. Our legal team did extensive due diligence. They assured us our authority was absolute. Sheriff Brody simply shrugged, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. Well, ma'am, the Thompson family has been here a mite longer than your legal team has been practicing law. Old documents, especially those going back to territorial days, tend to carry a lot of weight in these parts. You might want to have your lawyers dig a little deeper. Or, better yet, just leave Mr. Thompson and his family alone. He then turned to me, his expression softening. You go on, Thompson. Go see about your grandpa. I'll make sure Karen here doesn't cause any more trouble. I didn't need to be told twice. I sprinted towards the house, my heart pounding, a mixture of adrenaline and dread propelling me forward. As I ran, I could hear Karen's indignant protests slowly fading behind me, her shrill cries of injustice losing their power, sounding more like a frustrated child than a menacing tyrant. Inside, the paramedics were already at work, their movements swift and efficient. Grandpa was on the floor, his breathing shallow, but he opened his eyes and gave me a weak, knowing smile. Took him long enough. He rasped a touch of his old humor still intact. It was a fleeting moment of levity, a precious gift amidst the terror. They stabilized him, hooked him up to IVs, and assured me he was strong, a fighter. He would be transported to the nearest hospital for further assessment, but they believed he would be okay. The relief that washed over me was so profound it nearly brought me to my knees. He was going to make it. After the ambulance finally left, taking my grandpa to safety, I returned to the front of the house. Karen was still there, but her posture had changed. The rigid, defiant stance had crumbled, replaced by a slumped, almost deflated air. Sheriff Brody was gone, having, I presumed, left her to stew in her own self-important juices. She was on her phone, pacing back and forth, her voice low and agitated. No, I distinctly remember. Check again, the legal opinion stated. But what about the right-of-way? This is unacceptable. It was clear she was talking to her lawyers, undoubtedly trying to salvage some shred of her authority. A small, vindictive part of me reveled in her distress. Later that evening, after getting an update from the hospital that Grandpa was stable and resting comfortably, I went to the old safe in the study. It was a massive, clunky contraption, dating back to the late 1800s, smelling faintly of old paper and forgotten dreams. I spun the dial, the tumblers clicking softly, a familiar, comforting sound. Inside, amongst family heirlooms and faded photographs, I found it, the original land grant, a large yellowed parchment, brittle with age, its elegant script faded but still legible. It was dated 1872, signed by the then territorial governor, granting my great-great-grandfather Elias Thompson unrestricted and perpetual access and egress across all present and future subdivisions of the contiguous lands for the purpose of ingress and egress to and from the Thompson homestead. It even included a detailed hand-drawn map of the property and its surrounding area. The language was archaic, flowery even, but the intent was crystal clear. This document, older than the state itself, was indeed the ultimate trump card. It rendered Karen's HOA bylaws meaningless when it came to our property access. The next morning, armed with a scanned copy of the deed and a renewed sense of purpose, I initiated a series of inquiries. I contacted a lawyer specializing in property rights, explained the situation, and sent him the deed. His response was immediate and enthusiastic. Mr. Thompson, he'd said, his voice brimming with excitement, this is an absolute gem. This document effectively exempts your property from any HOA regulations regarding access. In fact, it might even challenge the legality of the HOA itself, given its claims over historical rights of way. The seeds of doubt that Sheriff Brody had planted in Karen's mind were about to blossom into a full-blown crisis for the HOA. The long night, filled with worry for Grandpa, had now given way to a quiet determination. This was no longer just about access. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully ours, about dismantling the petty tyranny that had dared to threaten our family and our heritage. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like we had the upper hand, and the tide was turning. The news of the ancient deed spread through the fledgling HOA community like wildfire, fanned by the very people Karen had alienated with her endless rules and self-serving pronouncements. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Jenkins, wasted no time. She sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA board, explicitly citing the 1872 land grant and demanding an immediate cessation of all attempts to enforce any bylaws on our property, particularly concerning access. The letter also highlighted the incident with the ambulance, subtly implying legal action for obstruction and endangerment. Karen, predictably, tried to rally her troops. She called an emergency HOA meeting, attempting to dismiss the deed as a forgery or a quaint, irrelevant relic. But the tide had turned. Many residents, already chafing under her authoritarian rule, were beginning to question her leadership, especially after the ambulance incident. Whispers of Karen's folly and Thompson's revenge echoed through the community. Some residents, particularly the older ones who appreciated the historical significance of our homestead, had already been quietly rooting for us. Now, with tangible proof of her overreach, they found their voices. The meeting was a spectacle. Karen, resplendent in a power suit, tried to dominate the room, but the questions from the increasingly emboldened residents chipped away at her carefully constructed authority. Why weren't we told about this deed during the initial legal review? One neighbor demanded. Are we liable for her actions? Another asked, pointing a trembling finger at Karen. The legal letter from Sarah Jenkins, which had been circulated by a sympathetic board member, caused a palpable shift in the room. The prospect of legal action against the HOA, and potentially against individual board members, was a potent deterrent to Karen's remaining allies. Then came the final blow. An investigative journalist from the local paper, tipped off by a disgruntled HOA member, published a scathing expose. The headline read, "HOA Tyrant Blocks Ambulance, Ancient Deed Reveals Shocking Truth." The article detailed Karen's petty abuses of power, culminating in the near-fatal ambulance blockade, and then revealed the incontrovertible legal weight of our family's original land grant. It painted a vivid picture of a small, power-hungry group attempting to control a community through intimidation and baseless rules, only to be undone by a piece of history. The light humor I had often found in Karen's ridiculous demands was now overshadowed by the public outrage her actions had caused. The whole county was talking about it. The fallout was swift and devastating for Karen and her clique. The community, once swayed by the promise of pristine lawns and uniform mailboxes, was now horrified by the human cost of such rigid control. Petitions for Karen's removal from the board circulated rapidly, gaining signatures by the hundreds. The other board members, facing the prospect of lawsuits and public humiliation, began to distance themselves from her. Within weeks, a vote was called, and Karen was overwhelmingly ousted from the HOA board. It was a deliciously ironic justice. But I wasn't done. This wasn't just about removing Karen, it was about ensuring such a travesty could never happen again. My lawyer, Sarah, discovered that due to the structure of the HOA's formation and the unique language of our land grant, there was a legal loophole. The HOA's primary purpose, as stated in its initial charter, was to ensure the harmonious and aesthetically pleasing development of the community while upholding existing property rights. The article in the newspaper, combined with the ambulance incident, had demonstrably proven the HOA's failure to uphold existing property rights and, indeed, its actively disruptive and dangerous impact on the community. Armed with this evidence and the growing public discontent, Sarah initiated proceedings to dissolve the HOA entirely. The process was long and arduous. A legal chess match played out over several months. Karen, true to form, fought tooth and nail, hiring expensive lawyers and attempting to delay the inevitable. But the momentum was against her. Neighbors, once timid, testified against her. The historical deed proved unassailable. The public outcry remained loud and clear. Finally, in a decisive court ruling, the judge sided with the residents, citing the egregious abuses of power and the HOA's fundamental failure to adhere to its own charter while trampling on long-established rights. The judge's final words resonated with a powerful sense of justice. This HOA, by its actions, has ceased to be a harmonious community facilitator and has instead become an oppressive and dangerous impediment to its residents' well-being. Therefore, it is hereby dissolved. A cheer erupted in the courtroom. The HOA was gone, dissolved. The meticulously manicured lawns and perfectly uniform mailboxes would now be a testament to individual choice, not bureaucratic tyranny. Our family homestead, a beacon of defiance, stood free once more. Grandpa, recovered and back home, loved to tell the story, embellishing it with each retelling, particularly the part where Karen's face turned white as a sheet when Sheriff Brody mentioned the old deed. He'd chuckle, his eyes twinkling. The redemptive twist for me wasn't just the HOA's downfall, but the rediscovery of a powerful piece of our family history and the incredible solidarity that emerged from a community pushed too far. It was a bittersweet nostalgia, knowing what it took to get there, but fiercely proud of the stand we'd taken. Our home, a testament to generations of resilience, stood firm, and now, it was truly ours again, free from the shadow of any Karen or any controlling board. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around. I've got more wild HOA tales coming your way.